Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for TAM number 76, Standing Up and Testing NSX Advanced Load Balancer. So my name is Bill. I'll be running you through this lab with my home lab. Let's get going. All right, so what is this thing, right? So if you go to the website, it's going to tell you Avi Vantage allows you to deliver multi-cloud application services such as load balancing, application security, auto scaling, container networking, and web application firewall. That's a lot, right? It automates application delivery, ensuring applications are available, secure, and responsive. All right, so if you're on the Avi sales team, you have to have that memorized, I'm pretty sure. You'll find that the branding is shifting. So we call it NSX Advanced Load Balancer. Sometimes it is Avi or Avi Networks or Avi Vantage. You'll see it kind of as we transition it through. It does not require NSX to be installed for it to work, which is pretty big. And I think that's a big customer misunderstanding as they look to evaluate this and figure out how to get this into their environment. So you can run it on bare metal, right? x86, virtualized with containers, and then also in public clouds, right? With your favorite hyperscalers. And then it's also based on 100% on REST APIs. So if you got an automation bug in you, this works really, really well with what you're trying to accomplish from an automation perspective. So I totally stole this from the website, but this is what the solution architecture looks like. And we're going to be leveraging this model very basically in this lab. So you can see there's an Avi controller, and it takes some inputs, right, and outputs, and then manages these service engines that are analogous to load balancers and other solutions in their architectures. The little purple boxes that you might see on the screen, that's what we're going to be focusing on today within this lab. So we'll be messing with some controllers, right, with a controller, with some service engines, and then vSphere. And so this is what my lab looks like for this session. So I got a couple hosts running some services. We have our vCenter, DNS, a couple web servers, and then I got a router and some LAN, right? And we'll be deploying the controller and the service engines and just kind of playing with them a little bit. So the current state of the lab, like where are we, right? The environment services are online. So DNS, DHCP, all of those things are available vCenter. There are some web servers deployed already. So we're not going to focus on configuration of Nginx or whatever. DNS is already, and then I already deployed the controller OVA. It's just the usual process, nothing specific, right? What I did want to share, and you can see this on the screen, is the customization of the OVA. It just asks for a handful of things, right? What's the management IP address of the controller, right? Subnet, gateway, and then the sysadmin authentication key that we use for things that we're not going to touch on in the lab, okay? But that's it, right? This is the only special part of deploying the OVA. Otherwise, I don't know, it takes 3 or 4 minutes in my home lab to get it deployed and everything else. So we're not going to bother wasting our time here on watching that. So what I want to do is cover the initial config of the controller, right? It's already been deployed. It's just waiting for that config. We're going to configure a pool and a virtual service. We're going to test that out. Then we're going to have some failures, and we're going to test that resiliency. And then we're going to configure SSL and then test that functionality, right? And so this should allow us just to kind of get a sense of what the UI looks like, show some of the basic functionality we're expecting out of a load balancer, right? And then here's some important disclaimers. I can't emphasize these enough, right? This is going to cover the most basic scenarios, right? Load balancing or configuration, load balancing, and SSL. The solution itself covers way more than this lab will, right? I want to be very clear on that. I'm going to make some changes to the config for the sake of this lab, but don't try it in prod, right? If you're watching this and you have a prod environment and you do what I'm about to do in this lab, it's on you. I'm just doing it for the sake of time. And then last, I will not have all the answers. I just won't, because this thing is so huge, and I focus my efforts on kind of standing it up and understanding how do I make it load balance stuff. And with that, we're heading off to the lab. Okay, So here we are. You know, imagine that we have just deployed the controller. We give it a minute, right? It's going to start up, start its services, and we head to the web interface for it. Okay, so let me just run through here and get this set up, and you can just watch along. It's super exciting. Now, I don't have SMTP services set up in my lab, so email addresses and stuff like that, I'm just not going to worry about. DNS. Oops. Right. Now, we're not going to worry about backups, but we need to fill that out for this. And then NTP, I'm going to leave that alone because my home lab has just access to these public servers, though, you know, there might be reasons why you want to do it. Also, you have the ability to specify some NTP authentication keys as well. But for this, we'll just leave as defaults. Again, no SMTP going on. I'm not going to worry about it, so I'll hit none. Now you can start seeing how can we integrate with some of the other solutions out there. Again, we'll be focusing on vSphere, but you can see OpenStack, AWS, Linux, things of that nature. We're, again, focus on vSphere here. So now it wants me to log into vCenter.
Do you know why someone would install this but select that last option, which is no orchestrator?
I don't know why, and I was scratching my head on that one. There must be a use case that's sad to say I'm not sure on what that would be. Maybe somebody else on the call with a big brain knows that one.
Just curious.
Now I want to highlight this here. We have some fantastic guides and documentation on the setup of this solution. There are reasons why you or a customer might want some automation going on, or they'd want to make the decision on how to deploy service engines and whatnot on their own. We are focusing on the ability to write, which means that this controller will actually be able to interact and instruct vCenter to do certain things. If you do not write, if you do read, then it's going to be able to read some data from vCenter and share that back, for example, but it's on you to do some of the more of the tasks that it would normally want to automate itself. So that's part of the magic here, I think, is the ability to do write. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that there. I don't have NSX deployed in my lab, so I'll keep the SDN integration at none. Now it's going to enumerate, right? Like, you know, my lab is not very complex, so I just have my one data center home lab. I would like to use some static IP addresses here, not DHCP. And I'm not going to worry about some of these placement settings, because I think for the complexity of my lab, which is 3 hosts and just very basic networking, I don't need that level of complexity. So we'll leave it kind of as it is. And then we wait. Hey, there we go. All right, so now it's going to have me pick my management network, right? So where are we going to deploy these things? So I'll go ahead and go to management. The service engines are going to be deployed by the controller when they need to be. Again, talking about kind of the magic of the solution, its ability to scale as it needs to. And so what we need to do is provide it some networking, like a little bit of a IP pool, right? And those things, so that it knows when I need to deploy a service engine, where am I going to put it? What is my IP going to be? So it doesn't have to ask the admin, right? So let's just fill out that info. 71 through, perfect. And then default gateway. 171 through 173, love it. And it does support multiple tenancies, not for me. I'm the only one. If there was somebody else here, I'd like to know about that. So I'll go ahead and keep no. And that should do it. Okay, so what did that take? I mean, it took depending on your environment, call it minutes to get that OVA deployed, right? It takes another couple to start, and then all of the services start appropriately so you get to the admin interface. And if you know your credentials, right, you know what your networking needs to be for like the service engines, you can get this thing deployed in, what was that, like 10, 15 minutes, right? That's pretty sweet. Any questions to this point? Pretty straightforward, I hope.
Hey, Bill, there's a question in the Q&A.
Okay.
And the question is the NSX load balancer that comes with NSX Advanced or Enterprise Plus now officially AVI, or is this a separate one? And I think I know the answer, but I'll let you take it.
Well, my understanding is it continues to be a separate solution.
Yeah.
Does that jive with you, Steve?
That's my understanding as well. And that is, the current, essentially, that's how it exists today. But I think, there's probably plans to integrate those two and make it more of a, I guess, integrated solution, right?
Yes. So if you have any more questions on that and you're public, go check with your VMware account team as well. Cool. All right. So from here, let's actually get in and you'll start seeing the UI. We'll take a tour of it a little bit later, but I want to go ahead and start the configuration of this first. And so, a virtual service effectively is, what are you presenting to your users? It's an IP address, or it's an IP and a port, right? What I want to do is focus first on creating that pool, right? That grouping of the web servers in this instance that are going to provide a service. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate over to the pool. So I'm going to click there and hit create pool. And it's going to ask you for a lot of stuff. And this is where, remember my disclaimer earlier, we're only touching on just the top part of what this can do. You'll start seeing as we progress through this UI, just a ton of things that, configurations, knobs you can turn and things that you can make it do. So for here, we're just going to create a super cool web app, right? I'm going to select persistence, right? So I want to instruct the engines on, how do I make sure my clients always go into the same place, right? So in this instance, I want it to be based on client IP. And I'm going to make an edit here. Again, this is one of those, I'm making the edit for the lab's sake. And I'm going to change this timeout to 1 minute, right? Okay. Next, I'm going to add a monitor, right? So this is going to be, how does the controller, how do the service engines understand, is the web server available, right? So I'll go ahead and add one here, and this is HTTP, right? So on the back end, it's unencrypted, just port, TCP 80. And again, I'm going to make an edit here. And this is back to the disclaimer. This is for the lab. This is maybe not for prod. So in this instance, the changes I've made, right? You can hover over the question mark. But how often are monitors going to be sent to a server? How often are we going to probe that server? And what's the timeout going to be? I want this to be 1 second, right? Because of the lab, I want to make sure that when we test the resiliency later, that we see a pretty quick response and we're not waiting, maybe a minute or whatever the default value is, right? So, if we do the math here, if we check 1 second, every second, right, we're looking for 3, right? When 3 fails, that's when we know the service has failed. So that should be 3 seconds, which should hopefully work out well for the lab. So the other parts, let's call this out, right? The default port that we're going to be looking at is port 80, which again, totally jives with the config that we have behind the scenes. We have different options for load balancing. Again, I'm just going to choose least connections. I mean, the reality is I have one client that's going to be connecting. So probably any one of these is going to work. But for what we want to do, we'll do least connections. And then I'm also going to do this enable real-time metrics. So that'll help give us some additional visibility as to what's going on, as we make, requests of the server. All right. Let's see here. We have something in the chat. This is Greenfield, which we hardly get. Are there any documentation or lab how we can migrate F5 to Avi? Also, what about global load balancer? Does Avi cover GTM as well? As far as I understand, it does offer GTM. And there are, in other customer conversations that I've been a part of, we do have the ability to look at other configurations of other load balancers out there and understand what it would take to migrate and any kind of cost savings. So I'm not entirely sure on the specific vendors that we can do that with, or, the competing solutions, but check it out. Work with the specialists because they can really tell you. It was pretty powerful story for my customer on that perspective. All right, so back to this. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, another quick question. What's been deployed at this point? Has it just been the controller or manager, or did it deploy those service engines that we were talking about?
Good question. Just the controller.
Okay.
And so I'll show you what it looks like when we get those deployed. Because I don't know. We've all deployed VMs before, but it's pretty fun when you're not doing it. So I'll show you what that looks like here in
Sure.
Maybe 5 minutes. All right. So let's add some servers. All right. So it's gonna enumerate, do a little DNS check. Yeah, sure. Right, so we have our 2 servers. Okay, so now you can see it's enabled, right? Did some resolution by DNS, blah, 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 right? So again, this is the most basic, right? Maybe we want to change some headers or rewrite, that's for somebody with very, more specific use cases than what we're doing. So from here, we're going to go back into some more advanced settings. If you care about where things are placed or what happens when pools fail, some timeouts, right? There's a lot of really good things here. For this case, we're not going to worry about these. So I'll keep the defaults and move on. And then we just review. So there we go, right? Now we have a pool, right? We told the controller about these 2 web servers. They're going to do really cool things in our super cool web app. And it's going to start checking things out. I guess that's really it for this. So let's go ahead and create the service itself, right? Because you have a pool, but until you actually create a service, it's just not going to do anything for you. So going back, again, applications, and we're back to virtual services at the top. We're going to go ahead and create a new virtual service. I'm going to do advanced because I think it calls out some really neat options in here. You could do a basic and then go edit this later on if you need to for some of the other options, but let's just start at advanced. So again, you can kind of see the same flow, right? You see with the same UI, the navigation across the top, you get a sense of how this is going to work. This is a virtual service for my super cool web app. This is where we put in our VIP, right? So now this is going to be the IP and the port that the engines start listening for, right? So this is 192.168.86.174. Okay, and you can see down here, just going down the left, this is going to be listening on port 80, which is cool, right? And it's, we're doing some proxy, great. Now this is where we select the pool. This is why I wanted to create the pool first, right? Here's our super cool web app. Cool. So now we're linking the virtual service to that web app that the pool we just created for those 2 web servers. This is really neat, right? So now we can come in here and actually start setting up some security or some policies here around network security. So let's just poke around here for a second, right? You can log the rules. How do you match, right? In this instance, maybe we would do a client IP, right? We specify the IP. And then what's our action, right? Maybe if it was in a geography that we did not want to service for political reasons or competitive reasons, whatever they might be, right? Allow, deny, or even just rate limit them, choke it down, right? We'll discard that change. HTTP security, right? Again, you have the ability to log that. Now we start understanding, right? Maybe if a user goes to a specific path, right? Or their header has something in there that we know is internal or external, right? So we can pick any number of these in here, right? Protocol type, for example. And then what do we want to do? close the connection, redirect to HTTPS, right? There's all kinds of reasons why we may want to do that. And it could be as simple as request comes in on HTTP, redirect, right? So no one ever gets that ability just to load the unencrypted page. From a request perspective, I like this, log with headers. Sometimes that's really, really important for dealing with the request itself. I think you're probably sensing a trend here, right? Here we can do some redirects depending on our rules, right? Rewrite the URL, sometimes that's handy. HTTP response, so now we're actually gonna affect the response itself. What can we do? We can modify, we can rewrite some stuff. The data scripts here allow you to actually, and this would, we can add a new script, but there's a lot of automation you can do within the solution as well. So it's not even just the REST APIs affecting it, but also within. And then last, access, right? So you can do some integrations with SAML-based as well as ping, right? Where we create some policies there and might, maybe we force, multi-authentication, something like that, right? So for us, keeping it pretty basic, we're just going to leave these as default, nothing here applied. From an analytics perspective, again, we want the real-time metrics. I'm going to change this to active just so we get some more data throughout this lab. And that's really the big change I'm going to make here. Right? And then last, right, these are the really advanced settings. I'm not going to enforce any performance limits, but you can see here, right? Rate limit the number of new connections, right? Or requests, what's your max throughput, right? All kinds of things that if you're a service provider or maybe you're running a storefront or something like that, you would really, really care about, right? You can also enable some basic HTTP authentication. If maybe you don't have a savvy SSO, kind of multi-factor authentication you want to integrate with, at least there's something you can do here as well. And other than that, I'll go ahead and just leave this where it's at and we'll deploy it. So let me hop over to vSphere and look at that. I hit deploy, right? Like I hit create service and the controller said, I don't have any service engines to serve this request. And so what's it doing? It created a folder called Avi SE folder for service engines. And now it's deploying 2 engines, right? Where you see the end is just a bunch of garbage, right? These characters have changed every time I've run through this lab, so it's not really predictable. And it's gonna go ahead and get those things deployed. And so this is where we kind of have to be a little patient in the lab. It does not take too long, right? Just maybe a couple minutes, but when you're watching water boil, it feels like an eternity. So we'll let this thing go, and I'm gonna hop back over. I'm gonna hop back over to here. So if we change in the applications down to infrastructure, and we go to service engine, you can see these are the 2 that were deployed, right? Totally works, TUN VGH, TUN VGH. And we can actually hover over this, right? You can see it was showing as down. Luck of the draw here, we caught initializing, right? So it's going to go ahead and it's connecting back to the controller and doing whatever it thinks it needs to do to get the configs and provide the service on the network. There was the question earlier about global load balancer, GSLB up here. So you can check that out. And I think the documentation calls that out pretty darn well. So let's let this finish. It shouldn't take too much longer. Because what I'd like to see is some health numbers here. Makes sense so far? This is driving pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So would we have service engines for every virtual server we create?
Not necessarily, depending on how you have it set up and your licensing and things of that nature. It will actually deploy more if you need more.
Okay.
Right. So as you make a configuration change that might prompt it to go, oh, well, we need another one, or as the load increases, it might deploy some more as well. So it kind of manages that. Now there are some constraints around licensing. Depending on maybe some of the licensing models that exist. I'm not going to be too authoritative on that, but there is an option where you do license based on the number of CPUs that it can consume. So, if we were to come back here, and that's a good little thing to touch on.
One thing is in a production environment,
Yep.
it's probably not good to create VMs kind of on the fly. You know what I mean?
Yes and no. I'm just curious. What's your take on that one?
Well, just change management.
Okay.
You have a situation usually where if you need something new, there's at least a process. And we definitely don't want back-end services creating VMs dynamically.
So I would counter that.
Okay.
No. And this is the fun part, right?
Go ahead.
Because I also think that in the right environment with the right understanding by the different teams, if you were to have a change or a new solution that comes in and everybody's aware that it could deploy based on load additional machines. So that it's one of those, like, we wouldn't want to catch the network team off guard. We'd also want to make sure that this is deployed in an infrastructure that has access, all of the VMs or the host it could be deployed on could access the right network. So I love the comment.
Well, I come from IT ops, so
yeah,
I've seen other products where the salesman is telling me how great it is that things will be deployed dynamically or things get rebooted dynamically and so forth. And I usually say, well, usually in a production environment, the last thing you want is change that everyone isn't aware of. So I understand the point.
Oh yeah.
You're deploying new devices based on load or based on capacity. That's very good because theoretically you don't have to worry about it. And I know a lot of our self-driving operations is trying to go in that direction as well.
Yeah.
I just say we need to be cognizant when talking to customers to say there is a way to manually do this.
Yeah, and I love that because it really is. I mean, it addresses a couple things, right? It's working with the silos, right, and it's understanding expectations, and also it's the scale. Because to your point, if in your environment you don't feel comfortable with something just randomly shooting out a VM, then you also need to feel comfortable that you know how to respond when it needs to happen, right? Yeah. So now that's on you to say, oh, we need that, and you go follow your run book. That's a great, I love it. I mean, I feel like that's a conversation for beers, right? Like, let's just sit back and chat this one out a little more. Yeah. But and I love it, right? Like that's a customer conversation that has to happen.
And should happen probably before the demo for the customer to be ready to answer that question. That's all. All right. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. What I'll call out though, to that point, like if we look at the size of the default engines that get deployed, 1 CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, and some storage, right? So like, okay, it's not a major investment. Now, if we look at the controller itself, 8 CPUs, 24 gigs of RAM, and a bunch more storage. So, deploying the controller is, it's more of an investment in compute resources than the actual service engines are. So, heading back, now you can see, that the controllers are up. And they're starting to measure what the performance is like. Now, granted, we just spun this thing up. I mean, everything is still cooking and heating up, and it has no idea. But you know what? It's up, it's available, it's something we can use. So what I want to do is, we have these 2 web servers. So from a DNS perspective, I've already configured web.vb.info as, pointing to that VIP. So let's just check that out. And we're just going to load this. Okay. So by going to web.vb.info, you can see, right, we have a PHP info, right? So we know we're talking to the server. And right here, it says web 2. Cool. So then we know that we're on web 2. but we went to web.vb.info. All right, pretty sweet. So let's kill web 2. All right, so we're just going to shut that down. Yeah, I want to do it. So if we come back here and we wait, actually I need to go back, excuse me, to applications, pools. Now you can see, web 2, right? That monitor, right? System HTTP noticed that it was down. Excuse me. So now if I come back here and I do a refresh, subtle change, now it says web 1, right? Again, going back to that disclaimer, that's why I changed the timeouts, because I didn't want to have to wait a minute or whatever the default setting was, right? I wanted to know right away. Right? Now that adds additional load to the web servers and to the controller, the engines, right? So we have to be careful doing that. But that's what I wanted to do. So I'm going to go ahead now and fire up web 2. And we'll come back here. So while that's happening, you can see, right now it's assessing the health going, there's a performance penalty. It's likely because my web servers are horribly undersized. And so, you know, we'll, that'll probably normalize itself out here.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, yeah.
We got a quick question in Q&A. What would the alerting look like? And maybe you, I don't know if you've gotten into this, but let's say, you know, one of those servers goes down in the pool. What are our options around being alerted for that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Let's.
Like, can it integrate with, you know, some ITSM service?
Yeah, well, let me finish. If everybody can hold off for like maybe, I don't know, maybe 5-6 minutes, I'm going to run through some of the alerting and some of the other options from a, you know, visibility perspective. If that's cool, I'll go ahead and hunt on that for just a minute.
Sure.
All right, so it's back. I'll refresh my page. I'm still on web 1 because of my persistence, right? I said for client IP, I want at least a minute, right? So I'm still there. I'm going to go ahead and kill web 1. So again, we wait, and what we should see, there we go, right? It found it pretty quick. We see the UI, UI caught it, right? So now if I go back over here and I refresh my page, I'm at web 2. Okay, so pretty darn quick, right? Which I appreciate. It was on the ball, and I'm getting the, I mean, I think the guest OS might not even be shut down all the way. That's funny. Oh, that was the wrong thing I clicked on. Power on. Yeah, it's still shutting down. That's funny. Anyway, so we're totally fine, right? We still have service. My cool web app is being provided, and I love it. So the other thing I want to do real quick is add some SSL, right? Because we don't want to be publishing our super cool web app without at least some kind of, you know, SSL encryption. So, you know, I loaded up my virtual service here. I'm going to go hit the little pencil on the top, and I'm going to add a port. So again, a virtual service is just an IP address and a port, right, that it's going to listen to, and then some magic on top. So I'm going to add port 443, and watch what happens when I hit SSL. In the bottom right here, it opens up an SSL settings, and here we get to select a profile. In this instance, I'm going to select standard. There's reasons why you'd pick the other ones, and then a cert. Okay. What's great about this is when I create the cert here, it will actually push it out to all of the engines. I don't have to go out to each one and make sure the cert's there and everything else. That's part of the magic of this, right? Do it once from the controller and it's going to pass it out. And if a new controller comes up, it's going to get it too, right? Keep it automated. I'm going to do self-signed because I don't want to have to go through the efforts of right now, you know, going to my CA and jumping through those hoops. So we're just going to call this one TAM lab web.vb.info. So let me just fill this out real quick. Okay. So So I filled out the cert info. You can notice here at the bottom, we can change the algorithm, right? Key size, also the expiration dates. I'll keep it at a year because this won't last much longer. And I'm going to hit save. All right. So now it's HTTPS. Okay. Super cool, right? So I think in IT, we're accustomed to seeing this. So let's take a look. If I go to my cert, you can see it was issued today for a year. If I look at the details, here we go. Right? So this is all the stuff that we just put in, right, into the self-signed cert. And like anybody's used to, we go ahead and hit advanced and proceed. And now we are on HTTPS, looking at my super cool web app, pointing to web server number 2. So what did we do, right? We configured it. We configured a pool. We tested it to show that we can bring hosts down and up and still provide service in a reasonable amount of time. In this instance, it was just 3 seconds of downtime, and then it failed, right? And then we also configured some SSL for it. That's pretty neat, right? And we started a little after, 10 o'clock? So call it half an hour. I like it. I want to walk through the UI a little bit because that's also where some of, I think, the magic here is. Let's start here at the pool. You see a consistent UI here, right? Showing analytics, logs, health, server events, and alerts. You'll see the same thing here for virtual services. And I'm going to change a couple of these things, right? So you can see end-to-end timing, pretty cool, right? From the load balancer to the server, it's 1 millisecond. The app is responding in less than 1 millisecond. I mean, come on, it's a goofy little PHP page, so it's nothing too crazy. If we look down here, this end-to-end timing, we also see these cool little icons, a configuration event, right? At this time, a config was created. And if I open this thing up, it actually shows what happened. And you get a sense of also the automation and the REST APIs you can use here, right? This might look familiar from a format perspective. So a ton of information from that one little gear. We can see here a power, right? Something happened here, right? The server is up, the pool is up. That happened here. We can come down here maybe. Pool server down. We can click that and we can get more information, right? How do we know it was down? The connection was refused, right? And then another configuration change, right? This is pretty cool. Previous config, new config. So we have some diff going on. So you can see what changed between the two configs. In this instance, there was nothing. And now there's an SSL config. So we can see what happened at that time, right? If we look at our logs, right, we can go ahead and it's actually kind of cool. We have this ability to search. And so for a busy environment, to go through all of the logs is kind of a bear, right? So we can actually search. So maybe I want to search for client IP equals this. So what was my experience like? So now we can see in this instance, like, wow, Bill said at 10:39 a.m., it was slow. I mean, 34 milliseconds isn't really that slow. But that being said, compared to the other ones, maybe something was going on, right? So now we can actually open this up, right? And we can actually see, let me get a little more real estate here. We can actually see what was going on, right? Between the client and the load balancer, I got an okay, took 3 milliseconds, right? Between the load balancer and the server, still got an okay, 2 milliseconds. My app was slow, right? That's interesting. Why would my app be slow, right? So then we have the ability to start digging in, right? On the right side, you can see the browser, right? The client, all kinds of additional facts that might matter to supporting this app and supporting the environment. So all in all, it's pretty darn cool, right? Health, start showing, as this thing heats up and understands your environment, right? We get an understanding of the overall health of this specific pool. Come on. Servers, again, we've seen this one. That server's still down. Events, right? So what's been happening? I'll do this include internal. What's been happening for this pool that we might care about, right? And again, we have the ability to just click this little plus on the side and we get more information about what's going on, right? I like this. Connection refused. Server, it's an Nginx on Ubuntu. That's totally right. It's not lying there. And then alerts, right? Now I don't have any alerts configured for what we were doing, so I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. If we go to virtual services, you'll see kind of the same thing, right? But it has a different perspective. Here we see an alert, right? The virtual service is down. Well, yeah, because we didn't have any engines to provide it, right? So that's early on in this process where we started to deploy the engines. Same end-to-end timing that we can see, right? If we go through logs, same kind of abilities to do searches, right? Load, end-to-end, what's going on. So we get the understanding of what that experience is like, which is just wonderful, right? Same thing with health. Clients, this is a little new, right? So depending on where you are and the configurations you have, right? We actually have some additional, overall page load time that we can show, how long it took for DNS, blocking tasks, things of that nature, right? A lot of this in this instance was waiting. So that's pretty neat. Security, right? Understanding like, HSTS is not enabled, right? That's totally true. And if you care about that, which I think a lot of modern, vendors out there and modern, companies out there do care about that, right? So understanding how, how this is going. Are you experiencing a DDoS, right? Things of that nature. Events, no surprise, and then alerts. So you get a ton of information out of this, which is wonderful. We wanted to talk about alerts, right? So if I went, you can see here, I went in the top from applications to operations. We don't have any active alerts here, so I'm fine. From the config perspective, we can create a new alert. In fact, actually, let's just do that. Where is the triggers? Yeah, here we go. Right, so when a certain event happens, right, and we can scroll through, there's a lot, right? Here's AWS and Azure, right, because this can run in the hyperscalers, right? So specific environmental alerts you might actually care about. What are we gonna do, right? We're gonna set maybe a certain system alert level, syslog, whatever else, right? If I go back here, we can see that we have some syslog, email, right? So you can send an email, you can do a syslog, SNMP trap, or you can actually run a script, right? And then this would be something that you would go ahead and craft for your environment based on what you need. So those are the options here. Hopefully you could find a way to take these alerts and then, forward them maybe email, syslog, or SNMP trap into your operational system so that you can at least get those alerts on when things fail or need your attention. From an event perspective, I love this idea, the config audit trail. So hopefully not everybody's logging in as admin. And then you can actually see who did what, right? Who is the user and what did they do, right? This admin can change the network security policy, and this admin changed the HTTP policy set. And you can actually see what they did, right? Pretty sweet. From a notification perspective, again, kind of alerts build on this. Here's your syslog information, right? I don't have email set up, so we're not going to be able to leverage that. Nor do I have SNMP, right? But you can certainly send it as you see fit. And then the last one here is really, really interesting, is the ability to capture packets going into a virtual service or in and out, right? Because there are plenty of reasons why, like, you're working with an end user and you don't want to have to get Wireshark to look at some of these packets or whatever else, right? So the ability to come in here and, you know, filter what you're packing or capturing, right? How many are you going to get, or how long you're going to do it, right? And what kind of information you're going to get. So really, really useful tools for trying to support what's going on. From an infrastructure perspective, we poked around here just a little bit. You can see our service engines. We have our cloud, which in this instance is my vSphere environment. You can group your service engines together. We have some networks that it pulled in from my vSphere environment. You want to monkey with some routing for whatever reason you need to. You have your static routes, BGP, VRFs, and gateway, right? For some of that stuff. And then your GSLB. And then admin's pretty basic, right? I mean, like, all right, well, we got some user profiles, right? And some roles. You know, this is where you can come in here and like, oh, I forgot to set up my email. All right, well, we can do that. This is where you set up your licensing, right? So this is all pretty straightforward. There are integrations with DNS services, for example, like Infoblocks, right? So you can also set up some of those in here as well. That's about it. I mean, we covered setting it up. We covered configuration of a service, throwing some SSL on there, and then the UI. So I think with that, I would leave it open for the floor. Any questions, comments, you know, whatever?
There's a couple questions from Q&A, and then I've got some of my own. So real quick, and I think I've answered this, but I wanted to get your take on it. So when you did the initial config of the controller, you specified the cluster, right? The ESX cluster, where it would deploy those service engines, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that answers one question that we had in Q&A, which luckily I answered right because I was paying attention. But what if you wanted to change that? Let's say you built a new management cluster where you're going to put all those. Can you go in and change that? And what happens to the existing service engines? Would you just have to move those manually?
That's a good question. That's one where I don't know what that would look like. You know, I could poke around and try and guess, but I don't know what that answer is.
Okay. And then the other question was back to the alerting. So if you go back to the operations, alerts, and then alert actions,
yeah,
that script option, right? If you create a new one, is that where we would do things like, you know, a webhook shim or like a REST API?
It's going to be defined by what your options are with the specific scripting language that they leverage here. So it's not necessarily Python or PHP or Perl or, you know, whatever. So it's got its own scripting language. And so I'm not sure what all of the capabilities are within there, especially for reaching out to external services to do something like that. So it would definitely be a browse through the documentation.
Got it. And then I think we had another question in chat. It was just more around, I think it's kind of documentation related, like where do we find the maximums that the platform can handle, like how many VIPs, how many pool members, stuff like that.
Yeah, check out the documentation. If you search for the NSX Advanced Load Balancer documentation, it actually takes you to an Avi site. Poke around. When you look at the UI, it'll say like knowledge base. But then it takes you to a ton of guides. And in there are guides for setting it up, but also mins, maxes, and things of that nature.
Okay. And then one other question for me, when you started, there was on one of your slides, it mentioned that bare metal x86 is supported. What does that mean? Is that the controller itself, or is that the service control, service, what are they called, service engines? Service engines,
yeah. So, you know, my understanding is that's where, because you've already deployed the OVA, right? So that's already been deployed somewhere. And so it's going to be, how do you connect to those different environments to do your operation and everything else? And so that's my understanding of how you would do it. You know, select Linux, or, you know, I think it would be the Linux. I don't think there's a Windows option.
Yeah. So I guess if you had the use case where you wanted those service engines physical, it would support that. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
That's my understanding. So if we went here, right, this is a very similar menu to what we saw, right? I'm going to go ahead and do, just for fun, Linux server.
Oh, I see.
This is the fun part of the lab.
So you'd have to build that ahead of time, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to deploy this to my web server right now, but we start getting funky.
Another question, of course, is API City. Are there APIs to create these?
Oh, the APIs. Sorry, you sound kind of far away. You want to know about the APIs to create these things?
Yeah.
Totally API driven. So I should have the. Well, let's just go here. Avi documentation. All right. So real quick, if you go do the search, right, and it takes you to avinetworks.com right now, part of VMware. If you go to resources and knowledge base, this threw me for a little loop. It actually takes you here. So it's not really knowledge base. They call it documentation, you know, whatever. Let's see here. If we go to guides, here's your REST API guide. Data script is the scripting language leveraged here. So if we open up the REST API guide.
Okay. Everything's there. All
We
right.
should have a
Thank you.
ton.
So
Continue with fun.
I'll be honest, it's great to see the structure here, but to code using this is very painful. It took me a while to adjust to it.
Oh,
Just to let you know.
but you were able to actually do it?
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
I'm able to take a look around, make changes, confirm stuff like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Real quick, I want to just call out, right? If we're sitting up here, documentation around the different features that it'll do and what you want it to accomplish, as well as some guides, right? So here's your API guide, SDK. Here's your guide on data script, right? So all in all, I mean, like, it's been a fantastic, this was a really great tool for me to go back and forth and figure out how to get this thing set up and how to make it do what I wanted it to do. It was pretty darn straightforward.
Hey, Bill, one further kind of question, which I think is good that we clarify.
Yeah.
It was around, do we support, you know, when you're creating your pools, does it support things that are other than VMs, right? Like a physical web server, right? And it doesn't care, right? It's just an IP address, more or less.
Yeah, well, exactly, right? So if we come real quick back to my pools, right? And let me just edit this guy. I think this will work. You know, a lot of what happens, right, is it's all IP, but what you care about is also the monitor that's keeping tabs on, you know, how do I know if the service is up and available, right? So you can see, you know, it's also the ability to pick, right? Is it HTTP or HTTPS? Are you just doing a straight up ping? Like, you drop the ping, you know that thing is down, right? So it's the ability to pick the service. You know, you want to load balance DNS? Sure. It doesn't seem to care if it's virtual or physical, as long as it's able to see it on the network. You should be golden.
Yeah, cool. Just wanted to clarify, you know, like, it's
That's
not
fair
for VMs, right?
Yeah.
Virtual infrastructure.
Sweet. All right. Well, it's anything else?
I think that's it. Any other questions from anyone? Feel free to unmute. I think that's all.
Okay, cool. You know, I know we're seeing a lot of interest in my specific region around this. A number of customers have purchased it. You know, what I appreciate after digging into this is, you know, there's a lot of stuff that it can do, but it's a pretty straightforward setup and it's a pretty straightforward environment, right? So it's not overly complex, right? It can do a lot of stuff. Just figure out what you want it to do. But I feel pretty confident, right? Talking to my customers now. Oh yeah, I think I know what that does, and you know, being able to support them and getting this thing going. So I appreciate everybody joining. This was super fun. So with that, we'll close the lab, and everybody have a fantastic rest of the week. And you know, talk to you soon.
Awesome.
Thank you
Bill.
very much.
Thanks.